The Weimar Republic was the government of Germany between 1919 and 1933. It was a test of democracy. It was right after World War I. Germany had lots of debt. They owed the world a lot of money. They were restructuring. Germany didn't manufacture anything. They had produced things for the war, and that was it. What they decided to do was this. The German government decided they had to print money. Now, printing money may seem like a great idea, except for the fact that there was nothing to back it. So they started with what was called the paper mark, and the paper mark, when they began, was equal to about 4.2 US dollars at the time. Salaries started to go up, costs started to go up, money became fluid, but the reality of it is, as the prices increased, the money became worthless. You see these magnificent stories that are shown in every history book of wheelbarrows of cash being carried from breakfast to lunch, the work that they'd done for the morning, solely to buy any bread, any goods, anything that they could get, such that they could pay it, because by the end of the day that paper would be worth nothing. And so these wheelbarrows of cash became completely worthless, such that 1 trillion paper marks equaled $1 after the inflationary period, which we'd call a hyperinflationary period of time, of printing and printing and printing. The main economic downfall came largely because of the printing of money and their attachment to debt with the United States. When the collapse of the markets came, the United States, they were dependent upon the U.S. It was the perfect storm. So not only was their money worthless, they were now owing huge obligations to a country that was suffering under the demise of the stock market. So the combination of all of these took what should have been a test of democracy and created fertile ground for someone who might come in at a later time and say, you know what? Democracy didn't work. The markets didn't work. Listen to me, we'll take care of you, which was the ushering in of the Third Reich. Look at the specific steps and the domino that occurred. Step 1, right wing and left wing, huge conflicts. Do we have a division between right wing and left wing? Many would say there is. Step 2, huge deficits run by Germany. Do we have huge deficits? Larger deficits than we've ever had in history. Step 3, no goods to produce. Do we have no goods to trade? What do we make? The United States doesn't produce goods. We have not had a production or an innovation of goods really since the 1980s and 90s when we manufactured computers. So you look at each of these steps, and the fact that Germany didn't manufacture anything, you can see parallels to the United States. And then you go to the next step. They started printing money. They printed money and started monetizing their debt. By printing money, they moved into a realm where their money had no value. And it started to reduce in value, driving up prices. There are 2 or 3 differences. One, the size of our economy and the consumption of our economy is much different than the German economy. So many might make the case, and I find it ironic, that we're too big to fail, that the rest of the world won't allow our currency to be so devalued. And many would say that all the debt that we owe China and Japan and others, they would never allow us to devalue our currency because it would only devalue what we have to pay them back. So that may be a difference, but I find the irony compelling. The very thing that we are claiming as the worst thing that could happen to America, that we would have companies or industries that are too big to fail, is the very thing we are depending upon for our survival. That we as Americans are so large as consumers to the world that the world would not allow us to fail. We are printing money and distributing it through the Fed, by the Federal Reserve, borrowing from the federal government, if you will, and putting cash out there. They're buying these bonds, taking the IOU and giving the cash to the government so the government can spend. It's no different than the government just printing it and spending it, but it appears to be through an external source, being the Fed, when it really isn't. It is simply handing the Fed cash to give back to them so that they can spend it, and the Fed holds the IOU. Now that kind of monetization of debt, or circularity of debt, is something that you didn't see in Germany in a circular fashion. It was overt. The question is, what happens when the rest of the world discovers that we are monetizing and doing nothing different than what they did in the Weimar Republic in Germany? The one thing that the Weimar Republic did post-Weimar, toward the end of a period of time, is where they shifted to that new currency and they backed it up with land. That was their first effort and attempt to establish it as a currency that had something of underlying value. What do we have in the United States of underlying value? Trust. As soon as someone no longer believes that the United States can repay its obligations, it has no collateral, and that paper has no value. A AAA rating means nothing if people can't repay it. But as long as they believe that we have sufficient trust, or that we will consume enough of their goods, or we will produce enough as an economy that we have value, then it sustains itself. But only so long as the trust is in place.